Let's begin. The November rain hammered against the windows of Damon Riley's Brooklyn brownstone as he sat across from his daughter Kristen at their small kitchen table. At 12, she had her mother's dark eyes and quiet strength, though lately that strength seemed fragile. She pushed her half-eaten dinner around her plate, her shoulders hunched in a way that made Damon's chest tighten. "Dad, do we really have to go?" Kristen asked, not looking up. Damon set down his fork. "To Christmas dinner?" "Yes, sweetheart. I know it's hard, but Grandpa Arnold hates me, Uncle Roberto ignores me, and Max just smirks the whole time." Her voice cracked. "Last year, Grandpa told me I should be grateful he even lets me in the house since she wasn't good enough." Damon felt the familiar rage kindle in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. 20 years as a documentary filmmaker had taught him patience, how to watch, wait, and capture the truth when the moment was right. "I know, Kristen, but this might be the last Christmas we have to endure it." She finally looked up, confusion crossing her features. Damon reached across the table and took her hand. "Trust me, whatever happens, I need you to remember something. You are not a mistake. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and your mother loved you more than anything in this world." Kristen nodded, though tears welled in her eyes. She couldn't know that Damon had been preparing for this Christmas for 6 years, since his wife Sheila had died. Since the day his father Arnold had looked at 6-year-old Kristen at the funeral and said, "At least now my son might find a proper wife." Damon had built his career exposing corruption and injustice through film. His documentaries had brought down crooked politicians, corporate fraudsters, and abusive institutions. But his greatest project had been hidden in plain sight for years, documenting his own father's cruelty, greed, and crimes. After Kristen went to bed, Damon descended to his basement office. The room was lined with filing cabinets and hard drives, all meticulously organized. On his desk sat a folder labeled Project Reckoning. Inside were 6 years of evidence. Recordings from family dinners where Arnold's cruelty was on full display. Financial documents showing how Arnold had built his real estate empire. And most importantly, a copy of his late mother Catherine's will, the one Arnold had hidden after her death 3 years ago. Catherine Riley had been a brilliant woman from old money, far wealthier than Arnold had ever been. She'd loved Sheila like a daughter, had adored Kristen, and had been disgusted by her husband's treatment of them. Before she died, she confided in Damon about a secret will she'd prepared, one that would only be revealed under specific conditions. The estate lawyer, James Redd, had been Catherine's trusted friend for 40 years. He'd helped her craft the perfect trap, and he'd been waiting patiently for Arnold to reveal his true nature one final, undeniable time. All it would take was one public act of cruelty that crossed a very specific line, wishing a minor child had never been born in front of witnesses. Damon pulled out his phone and texted James, "He'll do it this year. At Christmas dinner. My mother knew him too well. Are you ready?" The response came quickly. "I've been ready for 3 years. The envelope is prepared. I'll see you on the 25th. Damon looked at the wall of evidence he'd compiled. Financial records showing Arnold had embezzled from his own mother's estate. Recordings of Arnold admitting to bribing city officials for zoning changes. Proof that the $4 million trust fund, the beach house in the Hamptons, and the yacht Arnold loved so much had all been purchased with Catherine's money, not his own earnings. But those revelations were just insurance. The real weapon was simpler and more devastating. Catherine's love for her granddaughter and her final wish that Kristen would inherit the life she deserved. Damon's phone buzzed. His brother Roberto. "Dad wants to confirm you're coming to Christmas. He has important announcements to make. He specifically asked if Kristen would be there." Damon smiled grimly and typed back, "We'll be there. Wouldn't miss it for the world." He knew what was coming. Arnold had been making noise for months about finally distributing his estate to worthy heirs. At 78, with a bad heart and worse judgment, Arnold wanted to make his legacy official. He wanted to crown Max, Roberto's 15-year-old son, as the heir to the Riley fortune. And he wanted to do it in front of everyone, with Kristen there to receive nothing. Arnold Riley believed he was untouchable. He'd spent his life bulldozing over anyone who opposed him, including his own sons. Roberto had learned to survive by becoming Arnold's echo, marrying the right woman from the right family, producing a son, and never questioning their father's authority. Damon had tried that path once. But he'd made the fatal mistake of falling in love with Sheila Berger, a social worker from Queens whose parents had immigrated from Poland. In Arnold's eyes, that made her worthless. Damon could still remember the day he'd introduced Sheila to his parents. Catherine had embraced her immediately, seeing the intelligent, compassionate woman Damon loved. Arnold had barely acknowledged her existence. When they'd married anyway, Arnold had cut Damon's trust fund in half. When Kristen was born, Arnold had refused to visit the hospital. "She's not a Riley," Arnold had said. "She's contaminated blood." Catherine had been furious, but Arnold controlled the household finances, or so he'd claimed. What he hadn't known was that Catherine had quietly moved her inheritance into separate accounts, beyond his reach. She'd spent her final years working with James Reed to ensure that when she died, her fortune would protect the people she loved and destroy the man she'd grown to despise. Damon opened another file on his computer, this one containing the raw footage he'd captured over the years. He told the family he was working on a documentary about American family traditions, harmless nostalgia material. They'd grown accustomed to him filming at gatherings, barely noticing the cameras anymore. What they didn't know was that every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every moment of Arnold's abuse had been captured in high definition. Damon had enough material to destroy Arnold's reputation completely, but that wasn't the goal. Public humiliation was too clean, too quick. Arnold needed to lose everything that mattered to him: his wealth, his control, his legacy, and most of all, his sense of superiority. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Arnold would humiliate Kristen publicly at Christmas dinner, likely in front of 20 or more family members and friends. The moment he crossed the line, Catherine had predicted the moment he told a child she should never have been born. James Reed would present the envelope containing Catherine's real will. The will that left 90% of her $40 million estate to Kristen, with specific provisions designed to strip Arnold of everything he thought he owned. But Damon had added his own touches. He'd already contacted 3 major news networks who'd expressed interest in his next documentary project. He prepared a devastating exposé, showing not just Arnold's personal cruelty, but his financial crimes, his fraud, his corruption. The moment Arnold's world began to collapse at Christmas dinner, Damon would have everything ready to ensure the fall was complete and permanent. He thought of Kristen upstairs, probably lying awake and dreading the upcoming holiday. She'd endured so much, already losing her mother at 6, growing up with a grandfather who openly despised her, watching her cousin receive everything she was denied. But she was strong, stronger than she knew. Sheila had given her that strength, and Damon had nurtured it. This Christmas, Kristen would learn that her father had never been weak or passive in the face of Arnold's abuse. She would learn that patience and planning could be more powerful than rage. And she would learn that some victories required you to let your enemies think they'd won, right up until the moment their world shattered. Damon closed his laptop and headed upstairs. He paused outside Kristen's room, hearing her breathing steady in sleep. "Soon, sweetheart," he whispered. "Soon you'll understand why we had to endure this. And soon, everyone will know what you're really worth." 3 weeks until Christmas. 3 weeks until Arnold Riley learned that the prey he'd tormented for years had actually been the predator, and the trap had been set long ago. The Riley estate in Connecticut sprawled across 8 manicured acres, a monument to Arnold's ego dressed up as a family home. As Damon pulled his 10-year-old Honda into the circular driveway on Christmas Eve, he noted the collection of luxury vehicles already parked there. Roberto's new Mercedes, Arnold's Bentley, and several others belonging to extended family and business associates. Kristen stared up at the mansion, her face pale. "I feel sick." "I know." Damon turned off the engine and faced her. "Listen to me carefully. Whatever happens tomorrow at dinner, whatever Grandpa Arnold says, I need you to remember that none of it is true. You are loved, you are valued, and you are about to become the richest person in this entire family." Her eyes widened. "What?" "I can't explain everything yet, but your grandmother Catherine left you something. Something big. Grandpa Arnold doesn't know about it. Nobody does except me and Grandma's lawyer, Mr. Reed." He tucked a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. "Tomorrow is going to be hard, maybe the hardest day yet, but it's also going to be the last day you ever have to feel small in this house. Can you trust me?" Kristen nodded slowly, and Damon saw a flicker of something new in her expression. "Hope, maybe, or curiosity? Good. She would need both. They grabbed their overnight bags and headed inside. The house was decorated with the cold perfection of a magazine spread, towering Christmas tree in the foyer, crystal everything, not a personal touch in sight. Arnold emerged from his study, a tall man who'd once been imposing, but now looked slightly withered in his expensive cardigan. His eyes skipped over Kristen entirely. Damon, you're late. Everyone else arrived an hour ago. Traffic from the city, Damon said mildly. Where should we put our things? Your usual rooms. Dinner is at 7 sharp tomorrow. Don't be late for that too. Arnold turned and walked away without another word. Roberto appeared at the top of the stairs, his wife Candy trailing behind him. Roberto had their father's tall frame, but none of his presence he'd always seemed like a copy that hadn't printed quite right. Hey, little brother. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Roberto. Damon kept his voice neutral. He and Roberto hadn't been close since they were teenagers, since Roberto had figured out that agreeing with everything Arnold said was the path of least resistance. Max is in the game room if Kristen wants to join him, Candy offered, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She'd always been polite to Kristen in that particular way that made it clear she was being polite. Maybe later, Kristen mumbled. They escaped to their rooms on the 3rd floor, the smallest bedrooms, the ones reserved for guests who didn't really matter. Damon helped Kristen settle in, then returned to his own room and pulled out his phone. James Reed had texted, arriving tomorrow at 6 p.m. Everything is in order. Catherine would be proud. Damon felt a pang at the mention of his mother. She'd been the one good thing about his childhood, the person who'd encouraged his creativity, supported his unconventional career choice, and loved Sheila without reservation. Her death had devastated him, but discovering Arnold had hidden her real will had transformed grief into cold determination. He spent the evening reviewing his materials one final time. The documentary footage was backed up in 3 separate locations. The financial evidence had been shared with the FBI 2 months ago. They were building a case, but had agreed to wait until after Christmas to make any moves. The news networks were ready to run their stories the day after Christmas. Everything was synchronized, a carefully orchestrated symphony of exposure and justice. At dinner that evening, a casual family meal of rack of lamb and truffle risotto, Damon observed the dynamics with the detached eye of a filmmaker. Arnold held court at the head of the table, telling the same stories he'd told for years about his business triumphs. Roberto laughed at all the right moments. Candy looked bored. Max, a lanky 15-year-old with Arnold's arrogance but none of his charisma, scrolled through his phone until his grandmother told him to put it away. Kristen sat silently beside Damon, picking at her food. Across the table, Arnold's sister Sheila Berger, he'd almost forgotten she was visiting from Florida, watched Kristen with an expression that might have been pity. So, Damon, Arnold said, his tone making it clear he didn't actually care about the answer. Still making those little films of yours? Still documenting reality, Damon replied. In fact, I've been working on a family project. Might interest you. Arnold snorted. I doubt it. The Riley family doesn't need documentation. We need continuation. Legacy. That's what tomorrow is about. He raised his wine glass. To the future of this family. To those who carry forward what I've built. Roberto raised his glass immediately. Candy followed. Max barely looked up. Kristen's hand trembled as she reached for her water. Damon didn't raise his glass. He simply met his father's eyes and smiled slightly. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. Arnold would learn what legacy really meant. Christmas dinner was scheduled for 3 o'clock, but the real festivities began at 1 when guests started arriving. Damon recognized most of them. Arnold's business partners. A few distant cousins, some families from the country club. 23 people total, all dressed in their holiday best, all eager to witness whatever spectacle Arnold had planned. James Red arrived at 2:45, carrying an elegant leather briefcase. He was a distinguished man in his 70s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed. He greeted Arnold cordially, expressing appropriate surprise at being invited to a family dinner. Your late wife asked me to attend if I was in town, James said smoothly. Said there might be documents to review. Estate matters, you know how it is. Arnold looked irritated, but waved him toward the dining room. Fine, fine. Sit wherever. Damon caught James's eye and received a subtle nod. Everything was ready. The dining room table could seat 30, and it was set with Catherine's best china. The irony wasn't lost on Damon. They arranged themselves according to some invisible hierarchy. Arnold at the head, Roberto and his family to his right, important guests nearby, and Damon and Kristen relegated to the far end, near the kitchen door. Dinner progressed through multiple courses. Arnold dominated conversation, talking about his latest real estate acquisition, his plans for expanding the business, his vision for the Riley empire. He barely touched his food, too animated by his own voice. Finally, as dessert was being cleared, Arnold stood and tapped his wine glass. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for being here today," Arnold began. "Family has always been the cornerstone of success. Blood legacy, the continuation of everything we've built." He gestured toward Roberto. "My son Roberto understands this. He's given me a grandson worthy of the Riley name." Max straightened in his chair, looking smug. "Today, I want to make official what everyone in this room already knows." Arnold pulled out a folder. "I'm establishing a trust fund of $4 million for Maxwell Riley. Upon his 18th birthday, he'll also inherit the beach house in the Hamptons and my yacht, the Catherine's Pride." Applause broke out. Roberto beamed. Candy dabbed at her eyes theatrically. Max grinned. Damon felt Kristen tense beside him. He put his hand on her shoulder, squeezed gently. "Stay strong," he whispered. Arnold wasn't finished. He turned, his eyes finally landing on Kristen with something like disgust. "It's important to be clear about these things, to make sure there's no confusion about who deserves what in this family." The room went quiet. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. "My granddaughter Kristen," Arnold said, his voice dripping with contempt, "will receive nothing. She represents a mistake, an error in judgment. Her mother was a gold-digging immigrant who trapped my son, and this child is the result of that unfortunate union." Kristen's breath hitched. Damon's hand tightened on her shoulder, but he remained silent. "Not yet. Let Arnold finish his performance. Frankly, Sheila should have aborted when she had the chance. It would have saved everyone a great deal of trouble." Arnold's voice rose. "I wish this girl had never been born. She's a stain on the Riley legacy, and I will not reward mediocrity and bad blood with my hard-earned wealth." The applause that followed was scattered at first, then grew as Roberto started clapping enthusiastically. Candy joined in, then the business partners, the country club, friends, people who valued Arnold's money more than their own conscience. 23 people applauding the public humiliation of a 12-year-old child. Kristen stood abruptly, tears streaming down her face. She turned to run from the room. "Kristen," James Reed's voice cut through the applause. He'd risen from his seat, briefcase in hand. "Before you go, I have something for you. From your grandmother Catherine." Arnold's face went red. "What are you talking about, Reed?" "My wife's estate was settled 3 years ago." "The estate you knew about?" "Yes." James walked calmly toward Kristen, pulled out a cream-colored envelope with Catherine's seal. "But Catherine Riley had her own assets, Arnold. Assets you never controlled, and she left very specific instructions about their distribution." He handed the envelope to Kristen. Her hands shook as she opened it. "Read it aloud, sweetheart," James said gently. Kristen's voice trembled at first, then grew stronger. "My dearest Kristen, if you are reading this, it means your grandfather has revealed his true nature in exactly the way I predicted. He has publicly wished you had never been born." She paused, wiping tears. "I want you to know that you were the greatest joy of my final years. Your mother was the daughter I never had, and you are the legacy I choose." Arnold had gone pale. "What is this?" Kristen continued. "Therefore, I leave to you my entire personal estate, which I inherited from my own family and kept separate from your grandfather's business. This includes $40 million in cash and securities, the Manhattan penthouse, the villa in Tuscany, and all my jewelry and artwork." The room erupted, but not in applause. Shocked gasps, confused murmurs. "There's more," James said. He turned to Arnold. "Catherine also documented that the $4 million you just promised to Maxwell, the beach house, and the yacht were all purchased with her money, not yours. According to her will, any assets purchased with her funds revert to her estate upon discovery of cruelty toward her granddaughter." He smiled coldly. "Which means they now belong to Kristen." Arnold collapsed into his chair, his face going from red to gray. No, that's impossible. I controlled everything. Catherine couldn't have. She could and did. James pulled out more documents. She knew you, Arnold. Knew your greed, your cruelty, your ego. She predicted you'd eventually show your true colors publicly. She just needed the proof, and you've just provided it in front of 23 witnesses. Damon stood, pulling Kristen close. There's something else you should know, Dad. He pulled out his phone. Remember those family documentaries I've been making? I have 6 years of footage. Every family dinner, every cruel comment, every time you told Kristen she was worthless. He held up the phone, including today. All of it, high definition, fully admissible in court. Arnold's mouth worked soundlessly. And that's not all. Damon's voice was ice. I've also documented your business practices, the bribes to city officials, the embezzlement from Mom's estate before she could move all her assets, the fraud. He looked around the room. The FBI is very interested in having a conversation with you, Dad. They're waiting until after the holidays out of respect for the family. But come January 2nd, you're going to have some visitors. Roberto stood, his face ashen. You're lying. Dad built his business legitimately. Did he? Damon pulled out a folder, threw it on the table. Ask him about the Riverside development. Ask him where the money really came from. Ask him why 3 competitors mysteriously lost their permits. The guests were standing now, gathering their things, suddenly desperate to not be associated with whatever was unfolding. The applause had turned to uncomfortable silence, then nervous exodus. Arnold finally found his voice, but it came out as a rasp. You ungrateful bastard. After everything I've done, everything you've done? Damon's composure cracked, his voice rising. You made my mother's final years miserable. You drove my wife to an early grave with your constant criticism. You've spent 12 years telling my daughter she's worthless, and you think you deserve gratitude? He walked toward Arnold, Kristen still at his side. Here's what's going to happen. Kristen is going to inherit everything Mom wanted her to have. You're going to face federal charges for your crimes. And I'm going to release a documentary that shows exactly who Arnold Riley really is. He leaned close. You wanted to talk about legacy, Dad? Let's talk about the legacy of a man who destroyed everyone who loved him. Arnold's hands were shaking. He looked around the room at Roberto, who was staring at the floor, at the remaining guests who were carefully avoiding eye contact, at James Reed, who watched him with cold satisfaction. This can't be legal, Arnold whispered. I'll fight this. You'll lose. James closed his briefcase. Catherine made sure of it. Her will is ironclad. The witnesses to your statements today are numerous, and your son has documented evidence of your crimes. He adjusted his coat. I'd suggest you hire a very good lawyer, Arnold. You're going to need one. Damon led Kristen out of the dining room, through the foyer, toward the door. Behind them, he could hear Arnold beginning to scream, the sound of something breaking, probably the wine glass, and Roberto's panicked voice trying to calm him down. Outside, in the cold December air, Kristen turned to Damon, her face tear-stained but no longer devastated. Did that really just happen? It did. Damon knelt down to her level. Your grandmother loved you so much that she spent her final years making sure you'd be protected. And I've spent the last 6 years making sure your grandfather couldn't hurt you anymore. The FBI thing, is that real? Very real. I've been working with him since I discovered what he'd been doing. Damon wiped her tears. I'm sorry. You had to hear those things, he said. But I needed you to understand that his cruelty says everything about him and nothing about you. Kristen threw her arms around him. I thought you were just letting him get away with it. I thought you were too scared to stand up to him. I was never scared, sweetheart. I was patient. There's a difference. He held her tight. Sometimes the best revenge isn't a quick strike. It's a carefully planned trap that catches every single crime, every cruel word, every injustice. And then you spring it when they least expect it. James emerged from the house. I'd suggest not coming back here for a while. Arnold's having what appears to be a breakdown. Roberto is calling a doctor. We won't need to come back, Damon said. This was always going to be the last time. They drove back to Brooklyn in silence, but it was a different silence than before. Kristen kept touching the envelope from her grandmother, reading and rereading the letter. As they crossed back into the city, she finally spoke. Dad, what happens now? Damon smiled. Now you get to be a kid who knows she's loved and valued. You get to inherit your grandmother's legacy. And you get to watch your grandfather face consequences for the first time in his life. And Uncle Roberto and Max? Roberto will probably try to distance himself from Dad's crimes. Max? Damon shrugged. Max is going to learn a hard lesson about counting on someone else's money. The trust fund doesn't exist anymore. The beach house and yacht are yours. He'll have to make his own way. Kristen was quiet for a moment. Is it bad that I'm glad? No, sweetheart. It's not bad at all. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a surreal blur. James Red worked with Damon to ensure all the legal documents were properly filed. Kristen's inheritance was substantial and would be held in trust until she turned 18, but the penthouse Catherine's personal residence was move-in ready whenever they wanted it. The FBI made their move on December 28th. Damon watched the news coverage with grim satisfaction as Arnold Riley was led from his Connecticut estate in handcuffs, facing charges of bribery, fraud, and embezzlement. The anchor mentioned that an anonymous documentary filmmaker had provided the Bureau with extensive evidence of financial crimes dating back 15 years. Roberto called twice. Damon didn't answer. On the third call, he picked up. How could you do this? Roberto's voice was ragged. He's our father. He stopped being a father the day he told my 6-year-old daughter she was a mistake, Damon said calmly. You were there? Roberto, you heard it, and you said nothing. He's going to prison. He could die there. He should have thought about that before he spent his life hurting people. Damon paused. You had choices too, Roberto. You chose to enable him, to join in. You applauded when he humiliated Kristen. I didn't know about Mom's will. I didn't know about any of this. You knew he was cruel. You knew he was wrong. You just didn't care because it benefited you. Damon's voice hardened. Don't call again. You made your choice. He hung up. On December 30th, Damon received a call from Sarah Chen, a producer at one of the major networks. We're ready to air the first episode of your documentary, Empire of Cruelty, the Arnold Riley story. Are you prepared for the response? I've been preparing for 6 years, Damon said. Run it. The documentary aired on January 2nd in a special 2-hour block. Damon had crafted it carefully, weaving together footage from family gatherings with interviews from Arnold's former business partners, employees who'd been fired for refusing to participate in illegal activities, and competitors who'd been driven out of business through corrupt practices. But the heart of the piece was the footage of Arnold's treatment of Kristen. Viewers watched a grandfather ignore his granddaughter's birthday, dismiss her accomplishments, make cutting remarks about her mother. The Christmas dinner footage, Arnold's declaration that Kristen should have been aborted. The applause from the guests went viral within hours. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Arnold Riley became a pariah overnight. His country club revoked his membership. Business partners scrambled to distance themselves. The people who'd applauded at Christmas dinner found themselves named and shamed on social media. Damon's phone rang constantly with interview requests, but he declined them all. This wasn't about his fame. It was about justice. On January 5th, he and Kristen visited Catherine's penthouse for the first time. It was a stunning space in the Upper East Side, filled with artwork and books and light. Catherine had left everything exactly as she'd wanted Kristen to find it, including a room specifically decorated for a 12-year-old girl, complete with a note. I knew you'd need a place that felt like home. Love. Always. Grandma Catherine, Kristen cried, but this time they were good tears. Arnold's preliminary hearing was scheduled for January 15th. Damon attended, sitting in the back of the courtroom with James Reed. Arnold looked diminished in his orange jumpsuit, his face gaunt and gray. Roberto sat in the front row with Candy, both looking shell-shocked. The prosecutor outlined the charges: 15 counts of bribery, 8 counts of fraud, 6 counts of embezzlement, and multiple counts of tax evasion. The evidence was overwhelming: financial records, recorded conversations, testimony from former employees who'd been waiting years to speak out. Arnold's lawyer, an expensive corporate attorney named Marcus Webb, tried to argue for bail. My client is a respected businessman, a pillar of the community. Your client is a convicted felon waiting to happen, the prosecutor interrupted. He has extensive financial resources, connections abroad, and every motivation to flee. The people request he be held without bail. The judge agreed. Arnold was led away, and for the first time in his life, he had no control over his circumstances. Outside the courthouse, Damon was approached by a woman in her 50s with kind eyes. "Mr. Riley? I'm Naomi Burns. I worked for your father 20 years ago." "I remember you," Damon said. He did vaguely. "She'd been Arnold's office manager, disappeared suddenly one summer. He fired me when I refused to falsify some documents. I was blacklisted from the industry." She smiled sadly. "I just wanted to thank you for finally holding him accountable. There are a lot of us who suffered because of him." Over the next few weeks, more people came forward. Former employees, business rivals, people Arnold had crushed under his heel on his way up. Damon collected their stories, adding to his archive, understanding more fully the scope of his father's cruelty. But he also began to see the cracks in Roberto's facade. His brother had always presented himself as Arnold's loyal son, but as the investigation deepened, evidence emerged that Roberto had been skimming money from the company for years, not to hide it from Arnold, but to build his own escape plan. He was going to leave, James told Damon over coffee in late January. "Roberto, I've been going through Catherine's files." She knew. She documented Roberto, funneling money into offshore accounts, buying property under assumed names. He was preparing to disappear. Does Arnold know? Not yet, but the prosecutors are finding it now. James stirred his coffee. "Your brother isn't as stupid as he seemed. He just got caught when you took down Arnold." The revelation came out in February. Roberto was indicted on separate charges: money laundering, tax fraud, conspiracy. Candy filed for divorce within a week. Max, now 16, moved in with his maternal grandparents. Damon might have felt sorry for Max if the kid hadn't immediately started giving interviews about how he'd always known something was wrong with his family, how he'd been kept in the dark about his father and grandfather's crimes. The lies were transparent, but the media ate them up. Kristen watched one interview and shook her head. "He applauded when Grandpa said those things about me. Now, he's pretending to be a victim? That's what weak people do," Damon said. "They rewrite history to make themselves look better. But we have the footage. We know the truth." The trial began in March. A sprawling affair with dozens of witnesses and hundreds of exhibits. Damon testified for 3 days, walking the jury through the documentary evidence he'd compiled. The defense tried to paint him as a vengeful son, but the recordings spoke for themselves. The most devastating testimony came from Virginia Franco, Arnold's former secretary of 15 years. She described a pattern of abuse, fraud, and manipulation that went back decades. She had emails, memos, recorded phone calls. She'd been waiting since her retirement for someone to finally investigate. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" the defense attorney asked. "Because Arnold Riley destroys people who oppose him," Virginia said simply. "I waited until someone stronger took him on first." She looked at Damon when she said it, and he nodded in acknowledgement. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, Arnold stood to hear the verdict, his expensive lawyers flanking him. Guilty, on all counts. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for April 1st, an ironic date that Damon appreciated. The judge, a stern woman named Judith Golden, reviewed the evidence and the testimony with meticulous care. "Mr. Riley," she said, looking at Arnold over her glasses, "you have spent your life building an empire on the backs of others. You have cheated, stolen, manipulated, and abused. You have shown no remorse for your actions and no compassion for those you've harmed." She paused. "This court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for 15 years. Arnold collapsed. His lawyers caught him, helped him into his chair. He was 78 years old. 25 years meant he would die in prison. Roberto's trial was shorter. With the evidence already established from Arnold's case, the prosecution simply had to prove Roberto's complicity in his own crimes. He took a plea deal 10 years in exchange for full cooperation with investigators, uncovering the rest of Arnold's network. Candy's divorce was finalized. She got the house and custody of Max. Roberto got nothing. By June, the dust had begun to settle. The Riley real estate empire had been dismantled, assets seized to pay restitution to Arnold's victims. The beach house and yacht, technically Kristen's through Catherine's, had been sold, the proceeds added to her trust fund. The Connecticut estate was being auctioned off. Damon and Kristen had moved into Catherine's penthouse. It felt right, living in a space filled with love instead of cruelty. Kristen had started at a new school, where nobody knew about her family's infamy, where she could just be a regular kid. One evening in late June, as the sun set over Manhattan, Kristen found Damon in Catherine's study, going through the last of her grandmother's personal papers. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always. Do you ever feel bad about what happened to Grandpa Arnold and Uncle Roberto?" Damon set down the letters he'd been reading. "Do you?" Kristen thought about it. "No, not really. They were mean. They hurt people. They hurt us." She paused. "But I feel like I'm supposed to feel bad." "You're not," Damon said gently. Feeling relief that someone who hurt you is facing consequences isn't the same as being cruel. Your grandfather spent his whole life making other people feel small so he could feel big. He got exactly what he deserved. "And you? Do you feel bad?" Damon smiled. "I feel satisfied. I feel like I honored your mother's memory and your grandmother's wishes. I feel like I taught you that justice might take time, but it's worth the wait." He pulled her into a hug. "And I feel grateful that you'll grow up knowing your worth isn't determined by people who can't see your value." "Grandma Catherine saw it," Kristen said softly. "She did, and I do. And one day, you'll see it too." They sat together as the city lights began to sparkle. Two survivors of Arnold Riley's cruelty, finally free to build a life defined by love instead of pain. August brought news that Arnold had been moved to a maximum security facility after attempting to bribe guards. The attempt added another charge to his record and ensured he'd never see the minimum security country club prisons he'd assumed he'd be sent to. September brought a letter from Roberto, forwarded through James Reed. Damon almost threw it away, unopened, but curiosity got the better of him. "Dear Damon, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. I know what I did was wrong, not just the financial crimes, but the years of standing by while Dad hurt you and Kristen. I told myself I was just surviving, but I was participating. I was complicit. I'm sorry. I don't expect a response. I just wanted you to know that you were right about everything, and I was a coward. Roberto." Damon read it twice, then filed it away. Maybe someday he'd respond. Maybe not. Roberto had made his choices, and now he was living with them. October brought a surprise, an award from the Documentary Filmmakers Association for Empire of Cruelty. Damon accepted it with Kristen by his side, using his speech to talk about the importance of documenting truth, even when that truth involved your own family. "The camera doesn't lie," he told the audience. "And sometimes the most important stories are the ones we're afraid to tell." "Thank you." In November, Kristen turned 13. They celebrated with a small party at the penthouse, just a few of her new school friends, James Redd and Naomi Burns, who had become something of a family friend. There was cake, laughter, and not a single cruel word. As Damon watched Kristen blow out her candles, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. That evening, after the guests had left, Kristen asked him about the future. "What do you want to do with your life, Dad? Now that everything is done?" Damon considered the question. "I think I want to keep making documentaries, but maybe different ones. Stories about people who overcome, people who fight back against injustice. People like your grandmother, Catherine. Could I help? When I'm older? I'd like that." He smiled. "You've got a good eye for truth, Kristen. You see people clearly." "I learned from you," she said. "You learned from a lot of people. Your mom, your grandmother, and yourself." He touched her cheek. "You're stronger than you know." December arrived, and with it, the anniversary of that fateful Christmas dinner. Damon and Kristen spent Christmas Day volunteering at a shelter, serving meals to people who had nowhere else to go. It felt like the right way to honor Catherine's memory, helping people instead of hoarding wealth. On New Year's Eve, they stood on the penthouse balcony, watching fireworks bloom over the city. "New year, new life," Kristen said. "New beginning," Damon agreed. The final update on Arnold came in February. He'd been denied his appeal. 25 years stood. He would be 93 if he lived to complete his sentence. The news article included a recent photo, a shrunken, defeated old man who bore little resemblance to the tyrant who'd terrorized his family for decades. Damon showed Kristen the article. She looked at it for a long moment, then shrugged. "He looks small now. He was always small," Damon said. "We just couldn't see it because he was standing on other people." That spring, Kristen started writing her own account of what had happened, not for publication, but for herself, a way to process everything, to understand her own story. Damon encouraged it, reading drafts when she asked, offering guidance but never censoring. "Your story is yours to tell," he said, "however you want to tell it." The penthouse became a home in the truest sense. They filled it with Kristen's artwork, with photos of Sheila and Catherine, with books and music and life. The money from the inheritance sat mostly untouched in trust funds and investments. They didn't need much to be happy. By the time Kristen turned 14, the media attention had faded. The Riley scandal was old news, replaced by fresher outrages and newer villains. That was fine with both of them. They'd never wanted fame. They'd wanted justice. One evening, sorting through Catherine's things, Damon found a sealed letter addressed to him. He recognized his mother's handwriting immediately. "My dear Damon, if you're reading this, it means my plan worked. Arnold showed his true colors, and you were brave enough to act. I'm so proud of you for being a good father, for honoring Sheila's memory, for protecting Kristen. You are everything Arnold could never be: kind, patient, and truly strong. The greatest revenge is not in destruction, but in building something better from the ashes. Build a good life with Kristen. Love her, guide her, and help her understand that she comes from love, not cruelty. That is my final wish and my greatest hope. All my love, Mom." Damon sat with the letter for a long time, feeling his mother's presence in the words. She'd understood him better than he'd realized, had known he would need this reassurance, this validation. He showed the letter to Kristen. She read it carefully, tears in her eyes. "She really loved us," Kristen said. "She did, and she made sure we'd be okay. We are okay, aren't we?" Damon pulled her close. "We're better than okay, sweetheart. We're free." That summer, Damon started work on a new documentary not about Arnold but about Catherine. About a woman who'd used her intelligence, her resources, and her foresight to protect the people she loved from beyond the grave. About how real power isn't control, but compassion. Kristen helped with research, learning about her grandmother through old friends, reading her journals, understanding the remarkable woman she'd been. The documentary would be called Legacy of Love, a deliberate counter to the empire of cruelty Arnold had built. As they worked together, Damon realized that Catherine's plan had succeeded beyond just financial justice. She'd ensured that her granddaughter would grow up knowing what real love looked like, what real strength meant, and what it truly meant to leave a legacy. Arnold Riley's legacy was a prison cell and public disgrace. Catherine Riley's legacy was a bright, strong granddaughter who knew her worth and a son who'd learned that patience and planning could topple tyrants. On Kristen's 15th birthday, they visited Catherine's grave. They brought flowers and updates about life, about school, about the documentary. As they walked back to the car, Kristen said something that made Damon's heart swell. "I want to be like Grandma when I grow up. Not rich, that's nice, but smart, strategic. Someone who protects people." "You already are," Damon said. "You just don't see it yet." The years would prove him right. Kristen would grow into a formidable woman who used her inheritance to fund scholarships for children from disadvantaged backgrounds, who spoke out against family abuse, who became an advocate for justice. But that was still ahead. For now, on this spring day, they were simply a father and daughter who had survived a war and built something better from the ruins. They had each other. They had Catherine's love, and they had the satisfaction of knowing that cruelty had finally faced consequences. Arnold Riley had wanted to build an empire. Instead, he'd built his own prison. Catherine Riley had wanted to build a future for her granddaughter. She'd succeeded beyond measure. And Damon Riley had wanted to protect his daughter and honor his wife's memory. Standing here, watching Kristen smile as they left the cemetery, he knew he'd done exactly that. The story that began with hatred and humiliation ended with love and justice. And that, Damon thought, was the only legacy worth leaving. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.